For the Sake of My Children, a novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel narrates the life story of an Australian girl who fell in love with a Saudi boy. Then she converted to Islam, married her Arab lover, and traveled with him to the Islamic world. This book is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on a true love affair between a former Christian girl and a Muslim immigrant. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Therefore, any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 39. The Bullet of Islam Hits Again. After her miraculous rescue and release in Canada from a joint group of Saudi and Canadian Muslim terrorists and gangsters, the brave Australian woman Irshad Al-Shamari returned to her home country and lived in Sydney City. She decided to be a little careful in her movements as she carried out her religious campaign while exposing the evils of Islam. She has focused her travels and speeches in the inner cities of her native Australia. She decided to be near her loving Christian parents Frank and Mary Peterson, her 8 children, and her 3 grandchildren. She started writing and publishing some books that carried the same message that she used to speak wherever she went around the world before she was kidnapped in Canada. Her published writings and recorded speeches were purchased by many Australian Christians who began sharing and distributing them with other believers in their churches. For quite some time, the controversial Australian spokesperson has not been attacked or kidnapped by any Muslim terrorist or jihadist group. The defining moment in the life of the outspoken Australian Irshad Al-Shamari came when she delivered her speech on open ground in Sydney. She had never spoken in an open public space before that day. It so happened that all the Protestant churches of Sydney City decided to hold an open crusade meeting and invited everyone to it. The courageous Christian woman speaker, Irshad Al-Shamari, was invited to be one of the keynote speakers for that public religious crusade. Despite warnings from the police, the controversial woman, Irshad, accepted their invitation and came to speak to the crowd on the open ground. Sydney police did everything they could to ensure the safety of the Australian woman targeted by Muslim terrorists and the other speakers. All Muslim religious leaders and imams in mosques in Australia called on Muslims to boycott that general crusade organized by the so-called Christian infidels who are haters of Islam and enemies of God and His Prophet Muhammad. They liken the crusade campaign to the ancient Catholic crusades that liberated Jerusalem city from Islam in the 11th century AD and killed many Muslims at the time. Despite the warning and incitement of Muslim leaders, some Muslim intellectuals were invited by their Christian friends who brought them to the open Christian crusade. On that public crusade, the powerful speaker Irshad delivered one of the most controversial speeches that no one had ever dared, or anyone could then say. She explicitly condemned the 2 sacred Islamic texts, the Holy Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet, and considered them the main source of terrorism in the world, and the reason behind the abuse, oppression, and violence perpetrated against Muslim women and female children. Accordingly, she demanded that these Islamic religious texts be banned in all Western countries. In her speech, Irshad stated that the unbeatable problem of terrorism will not be solved by military fighting against the terrorists of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Mujahideen ISIS. If the American Marines and other NATO forces remain in Afghanistan for 100 years, they will not be able to defeat the Mujahideen of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who are the true Muslims. Likewise, the 75 countries that joined the US-led coalition will not eradicate the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS and other terrorist groups in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Somalia, Nigeria, Sudan, Lebanon, Israel, and the rest of the 55 Muslim-majority countries in the world. She explained this point by saying that the Muslim mujahideen with whom she lived for many years in Afghanistan are not military soldiers. They were not trained to fight as army soldiers, but as suicide bombers. Besides, the mujahideen are invisible enemies who are impossible to identify and fight against as military combatants wearing military uniforms that should distinguish them from innocent defenseless citizens. They can move freely among other citizens without being identified and blow themselves up without being suspected before they carry out their cowardly terrorist act. The Muslim militants of the Mujahideen of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups do not aim to win the battle against the NATO forces, but rather to intimidate and terrify their foes among the infidels, hypocritical Muslims, and apostates who are allied with the enemies of Islam. The brave Australian, Irshad Al-Shamari, concluded her speech by saying that the only way to defeat Islamic terrorism is to expose its sources and causes and ban it globally. She said that for this reason, the unsurmountable problem of Islamic terrorism will not disappear from the contemporary world unless the two main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, are banned. While the controversial speaker, Irshad Al-Shamari, was coming down from the podium, someone shot her at close range in the backside of her head. The bullet hit her head from behind and entered her skull. She was immediately taken to the hospital. At the hospital, the bullet was removed from her head, but she remained in a coma. The brave Australian woman Irshad Al-Shamari stayed in the intensive care unit for several days before she was revived from her long coma. Although she regained consciousness, she could not recognize anything around her. Doctors who supervised her treatment discovered that the bullet severely damaged her brain. As a result, Irshad completely lost her memory. She did not know who she was, and she could not even remember her own name. Her Christian parents, her 8 children, and her 3 grandchildren all became strangers to her. At that time, the mother, Irshad Al-Shamari, had 8 children with her in Australia. 5 of them are the children of her late Saudi Muslim husband, Mustafa, who was her classmate at a college in Sydney, and her eldest son was born from her first lover, who was a foreign Buddhist Chinese student who was also her classmate at the University of Sydney. Her twin sons Hassan and Hussein were born to an Indian soldier who participated in her gang rape in the military camp in Kashmir province on the border of Pakistan. Her 2 sons Abu Bakr and Omar were killed in jihad in the way of Allah against the so-called infidels in Bombay and Swat Valley. In addition to them, she has 3 grandchildren who are the children of her eldest daughter, Aisha Al-Shamari. With the passage of time, Irshad learned many things from her parents and children about her past life. She even listened to her speeches and read some of her writings. Despite that, she could not get her memory back. She has not been able to write or speak about Islam since that public crusade. Meanwhile, her writings and speeches that she wrote, published, and delivered before she lost her memory continue to speak for her and do an amazing job. Surprisingly, many Muslims were unable to understand her message until after she lost her memory and died as a battered Muslim wife who was subjected to abuse, torture, and persecution for many years when she was living among true Muslims in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. Many Muslims, especially women, admitted that after they heard her speeches and read her writings, they understood that their religion is a religion of terror, abuse, and oppression of women. With the loss of her memory, the terribly abused woman Susan Peterson finally got rid of those horrific memories of the abuse, torture, and violence she was subjected to as an Australian Muslima wife named Irshad Al-Shamari by her terrorist husband Mustafa and the Muslim Mujahideen. She was also liberated from that horrible nightmare represented by the brutal stoning of the innocent Canadian girl, Scheherazade, which had been torturing her every day for all these years. She no longer remembers those terrifying nights that she spent in that dark grave in the mausoleum of Waliullah al-Sali Mak al-Shabak, who was buried years ago in a mountain at the outskirts of Kandahar city, and the 2 nights she spent fighting against the lustful leader of the village of Sharif al-Banat, who tried to rape her for 2 nights in his house with the help of his evil guards. In addition, she no longer remembers those 2 days she spent half buried in a deep, dark hole on a remote reservation of the Canadian Aboriginal First Nation when she was kidnapped and imprisoned by the Mad Black Cow Gang. Therefore, her memory loss turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The wealthy Australian woman Susan Peterson bought a huge mansion in the cosmopolitan city of Sydney and moved her 7 children and 3 grandchildren from her family's residence to her new home. By then, she had officially changed her name from Irshad Al-Shamari to Susan Peterson. Furthermore, she changed the names of all 7 of her children and 3 grandchildren from their Islamic names to Christian ones. She chose all the names of her new children and grandchildren from the names of the 12 disciples of Christ and her daughters and 2 granddaughters from the women who had accompanied the Lord Jesus in the 4 Gospels, such as Mary Magdalene, Susanna, Joanna, and others that were mentioned in the letters of the apostles to the churches in the New Testament. She even changed her children's last name from Al-Shamari to Peterson. She also removed the name of the evil mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid from her 3 grandchildren and gave them her Christian last name. Her firstborn was named by her parents Susan's son Peterson. He is the love child born of her brief friendship with her first boyfriend, a foreign student of a Chinese Buddhist background. When she inquired about giving her son such a rare exotic name, her mother told her that the family had decided to keep the name of their dear only daughter Susie with them always. Therefore, they named her firstborn Susan's son. The Australian mother did everything she could to distance her children and grandchildren from their past Islamic lives. She converted them all from Islam to Christianity and took them to church on a regular basis. She even enrolled them in a private Christian school and started spending the big bucks on their tuitions and safe transportation on a private bus. She knows if they are still in Afghanistan, none of her 7 children and 3 grandchildren would have gone to school. The boys would become terrorists and blow their bodies to bits and pieces for the sake of jihad against the so-called infidels and enemies of God, and the girls would marry as underage wives to Taliban terrorists and give birth to more terrorists. Before continuing the narration with the events of the life of the brave Australian mother, Irshad Al-Shamari, and her children and grandchildren, we have to go back to her painful past and mention what happened to the Muslim terrorist who almost killed her and who are the Muslim leaders in Australia who recruited him to carry out this evil assassination plot. Sydney police have arrested and questioned the shooter who attempted to kill the Australian spokesperson Irshad. He happened to be a cultured, highly educated Muslim man born and raised in Australia. His name is Professor Mohammed Yassin. His parents are Arabs who immigrated to Australia before he was born and are originally from the Arab Republic of Egypt, which has an Islamic majority. He has never been to Egypt or any other Islamic country and lived since childhood in Australia. At first, the Sydney police called him a domestic terrorist dubbed the Lone Wolf, and it was believed that he planned and carried out the assassination plot alone. He is studying at the University of Sydney. He is in his final year of medical school. He is married and has 7 children. He has 3 Muslim wives at the same time. One of them is an Arab, originally from Lebanon. The second is a Somali who recently emigrated with her family from a refugee camp in Nairobi, Kenya. And the third is a white woman born to parents who traced their ancestry to British settlers, who immigrated to Australia more than 2 centuries ago. Only his third white woman is officially registered as his Muslim wife. The last 2 wives are reckoned by the Department of Social Work as divorced from him and living on state welfare financial assistance. However, Mohammed Yassin regularly visits his 3 harems and has sex with them because he considers them to be his legitimate Muslim wives according to the license given to him by the Holy Quran in Surah 4, verse 3. By sleeping with them, they all gave birth to his legitimate children according to Islam. He has 4 children from his Lebanese first wife, 2 sons from his second Somali wife, and a daughter from his third white British Australian wife. Only his last wife was born a Christian, but fell in love with him and converted to his religion as Susan did when she fell in love with the Saudi boy Mustafa Al-Shamari and became his Muslim wife Irshad. Mr. Mohammed Yassin, originally of Egyptian background, is a deeply religious man. He performs all his 5 daily prayers at the largest mosque in Sydney. He is an active member of an Islamic group called Al-Muhajirin al-Muslimin, which means Muslim immigrants. This group has been banned by the Australian government. The main headquarters in which this Islamic group originated in the United Kingdom has also been banned. Despite this, the members of the group continue to meet secretly in houses and apartments and plan their terrorist plots against the so-called enemies of Islam. Several members of the group are carefully monitored by the Australian police. Before the group was banned, its leaders and other senior speakers had publicly condemned all the countries of the West and the secular state of India, which they called the idolatrous Hindu state, and called for the death of America and the destruction of the state of Israel. They organized many demonstrations and called on Western forces to withdraw from Islamic countries in Iraq and Afghanistan. They challenged the Australian government that if those unclean forces did not withdraw, the blood of the infidels would be spilled in the streets of Sydney and many of the other major European cities. The immigrants called Australia, America, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, India, and any non-Muslim country Dar al-Harb, or the land of war for the sake of Allah. And they believe that it is the duty of Islam that Muslims require to declare jihad against the infidels to spread Islam in the countries of Dar al-Harb. In addition, the immigrants are against voting in Kufra or infidel lands. They believe that voting for non-Muslims in any election is against Islam. The immigrants called on the Australian government to allow Muslims to practice Islamic Sharia laws among Australian Muslims, but this impossible demand was completely rejected for a long time. However, the immigrants defy the government's decision and follow their Sharia Islamic laws in their daily lives. Many of them practice polygamy and marry minor female children. Some of them performed female genital mutilation by secretly circumcising the private parts of their daughters and encouraged other Muslim parents to practice FGM on their small girls. The immigrants beat their wives and daughters on their heads, as commanded by the Quran in Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse 34. Sometimes, they used copies of the Quran books and hit their wives and daughters on the heads. They always avoid hitting their women in the face so that no one can see the scars of their cruelty on the bodies of these battered Muslim women. Their fathers or husbands would not allow immigrant women to go to non-Muslim doctors. Muslim men do not allow their wives to go to any male doctor even if that doctor is a Muslim man like them. Their leaders told them that allowing a Muslim woman to reveal her body in front of an infidel doctor is forbidden and prohibited by Sharia, even if the infidel family doctor is a female like herself. Moreover, immigrants have their own legal lawyers who are Muslims. Therefore, if their women have problems with their men, they are required to go to a Muslim legal lawyer. If any immigrant woman defies this restriction, other Muslim families will boycott her and treat her as an apostate Muslimah, an impure Christian infidel, or an outcast Hindu. All immigrant children are enrolled in a private Islamic school called Dar al-Huda, or the House of God's Guidance and Institute of His Infallible Messenger. This school is like a public washrooms, which has been divided into Dar al-Huda for boys and Dar al-Huda for girls. Although it is officially registered as one Islamic school, Dar al-Huda is 2 private Islamic schools under one name. Muslim students have separate classrooms and Muslim girls have their separate classrooms on the same campus of this private Islamic school. All the teachers of Dar al-Huda Institute of Learning are Muslim men and women. A non-Muslim, whatever his or her academic qualifications, will not be employed as a teacher at this private Islamic school in Sydney. Even the other employees, male and female, and the maintenance and cleaning workers are Muslims. The 2 schools of Dar al-Huda are divided by a partition as high as the Great Wall of China and as strong as the Berlin Wall. From grade 1 to grade 12, students of Dar al-Huda school are taught daily an Islamic subject. Each student is required to study the main texts of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, as well as the history of the early Islamic invasions during the spread of Islam throughout the world by the edge of the sword, euphemistically called the Islamic conquests, when the conquering Mujahideen reached Spain in the west and India in the east. For this reason, only non-Muslim students, males or females, are accepted. In these classrooms, Muslim students, both boys and girls, are forced to memorize the verses of the Holy Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. In addition, they are taught the history of the Islamic conquests or invasions. They will be told how Islam spread all over the world through great battles fought by the brave Mujahideen led by outstanding military generals such as Khalid ibn al-Walid, Tariq ibn Ziyad, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, Babur, Saladin, the hordes of Mongols and the Great Turks, and the great Indian Muslim Mughal Emperor Akbar, among others. Boys, not girls, are taught the beauty of the virgins of paradise that God created for the Muslim male martyrs in the jihad who die for God or the jihad against the infidels and enemies of Allah and His Prophet. Students are told that for every Muslim martyr, God has prepared 72 virgin nymphs or houris. The mermaid or nymph of paradise does not urinate, defecate, menstruate, or become pregnant, and she has a circumcised and genitally mutilated stitched-tight pussy, which is like the eye of a needle. Therefore, while fucking the small pussy of his virgin with his big dick, the martyr of paradise enjoys sex with her so much when she wails and bewails due to the pain of penetration. Besides English, male and female students are taught Arabic, Urdu, and Persian languages. The Muslim killer who shot the Australian spokesperson Irshad Al-Shamari is an official teacher at Dar al-Huda School. He teaches Islamic courses and other academic subjects. Besides, he is studying medicine at the most prestigious medical college in the University of Sydney. The plot to assassinate the controversial speaker, Irshad, who is considered the #1 enemy of Islam, was hatched in the house of the leader of the Muslim Muhajirin group, a week before that general Christian crusade. By the way, it is worth repeating that many Muslims in Australia said that the name of the open gathering of the public crusade for Christians reminded them of the ancient European crusades waged and fought by the Catholic Church against Muslims over 2 centuries. In the Promised Land, which is known today as Israel by the Jews and Palestine by Muslims and Christian Arabs. In any case, the mastermind of the assassination plan is the leader of the Muslim Muhajirin branch of Australia. Therefore, the Sydney police have arrested the shooter, the leader, and the 4 other prominent members of the band group. The truth of the matter is that al-Muhajirin made 2 attempts before to assassinate the Australian woman Irshad Al-Shamari, but they failed in both attempts. Both of their previous plots were foiled by Sydney police. However, the 3rd attempt was successful because the controversial speaker, Irshad, agreed to deliver her speech in an open space. This was what made it difficult for the Australian police to prevent their 3rd terrorist plot. Shortly after their arrest, 5 of these Muslim terrorists were tried and found guilty of their cowardly terrorist plot and sentenced to 10 years in prison each. As for the shooter, Professor Muhammad Yassin, a teacher at Dar al-Huda School, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the opportunity to apply for parole. Chapter 40. The Association of Abused Muslim Women. It took the amnesiac Susan Peterson 3 years to fully regain her normal memory and remember all the events of her life. She undergoes many treatments and brain surgeries before she can remember her past life. During those 3 years, she lived the most wonderful life that a mother could have enjoyed with her children and grandchildren. She enjoyed seeing her children gradually grow up and have all the love and care that a good mother like her could give her offspring. All her children and grandchildren did well in their schools. Most of them became luminaries in the church among their other Christian brethren. When Susan regained her memory, she remembered once again those dark years of suffering, abuse, and persecution that she and her children had gone through in the Muslim world. However, she no longer feels the pain and agony she used to feel before she was hit by the treacherous bullet of Islam that made her lose her memory. She considered her survival a divine miracle. She looked back on the agonizing 10 years she spent in the dark and lagging behind the underdeveloped world of Islam with these hard-hearted barbarians in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan as good experiences that God had ordained for her to go through to know and feel the pain that almost every Muslim girl and Muslim woman in her life goes through. She spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia, 5 years in the Mujahideen camps in Afghanistan, 12 months in a women's prison in Kandahar city, and 1 year with Muslims in New Delhi, the capital of India. She also spent 4 years kept under lock and key in the Gitmo Detention Center, which was created for the worst Muslim terrorists in the world. Susan Peterson concluded that God had called her to expose the evils of Islam and fight for the rights of Muslim women. Therefore, once she became aware of her past life, she decided to pioneer an association of ex-Muslim women who had gone through the same abusive and oppressive lives and have something to share with the outside world. She was even determined to sponsor any Muslim woman who wanted to escape that infernal and abusive environment and come to live in the West. She also called on female applicants who have already made their way out of the Islamic world and who currently live in Western countries and have painful testimonies of violence and persecution resulting from the misogynistic and unjust teachings of Islam, which they want to share, to send them to her for publication on her expensive. Hundreds of ex-Muslim women joined Susan's association and boldly shared their bitter experiences of being wives to Muslim husbands and daughters to Muslim parents. She began organizing meetings in churches and public places, allowing battered Muslim women to speak for themselves and share their testimonies. Susan herself shared many times her bitter experience when she was a Muslim wife to a Muslim man. Even her eldest daughter, Aisha, joined her mother with the Abused Muslim Women Association and shared her heartbreaking story of kidnap, rape, and house imprisonment when she was a minor child at the age of 10 by that old man, Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, who justified it in the name of permissible marriage of female children in Surah Al-Talaq 65 verse 4, as well as the bad example of the pedophile Prophet Muhammad, who similarly married, raped, and imprisoned for 9 years a 6-year-old girl, under the cover of Islamic lawful marriage. His sexual victim was his child bride, Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, whom he married when she was 6 years old and started raping her when she was 9 years old and imprisoned her as a sexual victim for 9 years until he died. The Australian woman, Susan Peterson, invited her American friend Nadia Noor and asked her to come to Australia and share her testimony that she was once the Muslim wife of the notorious white Muslim terrorist leader, Muhammad Nur al-Fransawi. Nadia gladly accepted the invitation and traveled with her 2 sons from Chicago to Sydney and shared her testimony at a large gathering of the Abused Muslim Women's Association. Shortly after her return, and at the urging and encouragement of her Australian friend Susan, Nadia started the first branch of the Society of Abused Muslim Women in the USA. The former terribly abused Australian wife Irshad spent lavishly on her new branch of the Foreign Society of the Abused Muslim Women, which was founded by her American friend Nadia. Some Muslim women who were abused have also donated financially. Susan encouraged some of the female members to write down their testimonies and send them to her, promising to publish them at her own expenses. Accordingly, many women have written and published their experiences of abuse and oppression as Muslim wives, sisters, and daughters. Their painful testimonies were circulated all over the world, became famous, and opened the eyes of those who read them among Muslims and those whom Islam calls the immoral female infidels. Many people, male and female, Muslims and non-Muslims, have written to the Association of Battered Muslim Women and expressed their feelings and emotional support for those Muslim women who went through such bitter experiences in their painful lives. Irshad has also authored a book about her married life in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. They are memoirs of her oppressive married life, which she lived for 3 years with her abusive Arab husband, Mustafa, in the Sahara Desert of Saudi Arabia, and memories of her bitter life for 5 years in the Mujahideen camps in Afghanistan and the year when she was unjustly incarcerated in the prison for Nashis or disobedient Muslim women in Kandahar. Among the many testimonies given by members of the Society of Battered Muslim Women, Susan Peterson selected 6 remarkable testimonies and included them in her tragic life book that she decided to write and publish. These 7 testimonies are real experiences of battered Muslim women: an Egyptian girl known as Akram Hafez, a Sudanese young woman named Insaf Salah al-Junaid, a Somali wife named Aisha Abdul Qadir, a Pakistani sister named Shabana Siddiqui, a Syrian daughter named Layla Haddad, and an American woman who is her beloved friend Nadia Noor, and of course the brave Australian hero herself, Susan Peterson, who was once a persecuted Muslim wife named Irshad Al-Sham Mari. These abused Muslim women endured the most abusive life a woman in the world has ever experienced. Susan chose their testimonies because these women had the worst Muslim life of which she had ever heard. Accordingly, her new book has become one of the best sellers in the world because it includes those 6 heartbreaking testimonies along with her painful testimony. It was read by millions of people and touched the souls of many people worldwide. The New York Times Magazine named it a bestseller for that year. Susan's book has been published under the title Irshad and the Abuse of Muslim Women. It was translated and published in Arabic under the same title. As the famous Arab proverb says, its end is musk. Therefore, the best way to conclude Irshad's novel is that we must mention her second love life, which began with her Good Samaritan lover, her American guard, in the notorious Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. The beautiful Australian woman Susan did not forget that handsome American guard, to whom she revealed her deep love, and he also admitted to her that he shared the same feelings with her. In those years of her incarceration in the Gitmo, she allowed him to kiss her on the lips, hug her sexy body, and caress her breasts and private parts secretly inside her small cell whenever they had the chance to be alone. Therefore, her guard turned her confinement into a fortified castle for an imprisoned queen who found a king in a forest surrounded by human terrorists from the Muslim Mujahideen men who are considered the evilest people in the world. After her release from the dreaded Gitmo, the Australian prodigal daughter lost contact with her American guardian angel for some time. Their friendship was revived when the beloved remembered her lover and needed his help in the Swat Valley, Pakistan, in arresting the White Devil, the terrorist leader who wanted to be found, dead or alive. Muhammad Noor al-Fransawi, may God curse him, and he is now alone, far from his victims of abused Muslim women and underage girls whom he raped. Locked in a solitary confinement cell in a maximum security prison in the United States after being sentenced to life in prison. From that time on, Susan continued to talk constantly by telephone, and the two intimate lovers decided to meet and crown their love in a holy Christian matrimonial union. Unfortunately, they did not meet each other until Susan was wounded by the treachery of the cowardly Islamic terrorism. When her American boyfriend learned of the tragic accident of his beloved Australian girlfriend Irshad by phone from her Christian parents, he came to Sydney City to visit her. But she did not recognize him because she had lost her memory, and he became a stranger to her, as is the case with her other dear family members. Despite this, the American Good Samaritan did not abandon the misguided Australian woman he found when she was a suspected terrorist, a mother deprived of her children, and a Muslim widowed wife imprisoned in the prison of the worst creatures that ever existed. He trusted her, cleansed her of her bad reputation, stained with the shame of Islamic terrorism, showered her with his inexhaustible love, and introduced her to the Lord Jesus Christ when he secretly gave her a copy of the Gideon's Holy Bible and invited her to attend Sunday Mass in the prison church. Therefore, during her imprisonment, he gave her the best years of her life in that notorious prison. He even convinced many of her guards and other American Marines of her innocence from charges of terrorism and the sincerity of her conversion from Islam to Christianity, and helped her achieve that noble goal. He also convinced the black priest of the church, who was of African American origin, about her genuine repentance and conversion. For 3 years, the American lover did everything he could to recover the memory of his Australian sweetheart. On his recommendation, Susan was transferred in her 3rd year to an American hospital in New York that specializes in performing complex neurological and brain surgeries. And the last operation, which was performed by the 2 best American neurosurgeons specializing in brain and spinal cord surgery, which took 8 hours, was the final straw that brought back to the Australian woman Susan Peterson the memory of the persecuted and abused Muslim wife, Irshad Al-Sham Mari, who had been separated from her for 3 years. which brings with it her lost love and memories of her loyal guardian angel, the Good Samaritan. To sum up a long story and make it short, the Australian sweetheart Susan Peterson married her American lover in a church in Sydney, a year after she regained her memory and love. The truth of the matter is that the former Muslim prisoner in Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, Irshad al-Shamari, did not know the name of her Good Samaritan guard until she came out of the long-lost memory through the complex nerve surgeries in her brain. After their marriage, the beautiful bride, Susan, moved with her handsome groom, Samuel Wilson, to live with him as a Christian husband and his wife in New York City. Although his name is Samuel, he is known as Sam. The kind Australian mother, Susan, took her sons, daughters, and grandchildren to live with her in the country of her beloved Sam, the Good Samaritan American. It is also known as Uncle Sam's Land. Susan preferred to live in America rather than Australia because she is still determined to continue her campaign of exposing and destroying the terrorist, misogynistic, and hateful teachings of Islam against non-Muslims whom that damned Arab religion calls immoral infidels. Her wonderful first year in the USA with her Christian husband, Sam, and the terrifying first year that Irshad stayed in Saudi Arabia with her Muslim husband, Mustafa, explained to her the vast difference between her second marriage and her first marriage. Her abusive, controlling, and tyrannical first husband took her to the worst and most dangerous country in the world, Afghanistan, where she and her children were exposed to the most terrible types of injustice, persecution, and torment, while her loving and kind second husband, who is according to her the Good Samaritan, brought her to the greatest and most beautiful country in the world, America, which is the promised land and is the dream of every human being and every refugee in the world. On their first visit outside of Australia, her Muslim husband Mustafa forced her to travel with him to his motherland, where they visited the Black House in the city of Mecca, which is called the Sacred House of God, where they circumambulated around it and the Black Stone, which was carved in the form of a woman's pussy, which symbolized the humiliation of the human female sexually, subduing her and violating the sanctity of her body before the Muslim man who gave him Islam the right, possessing her as a wife, a slave girl, beating her, abusing her, and raping her at any time he wants to fuck her pussy, and in any natural sexual way or anomalous practice, such as sodomizing her in the ass against her desire. Their first visit outside of Australia after marriage, she was taken by her Christian husband Sam to his homeland, the United States of America, which represents the pinnacle and greatness of Western civilization that was built on the Judeo-Christian heritage, where there is the White House, which symbolizes true democracy and equal rights for women with their male counterparts, and where there is the Statue of Liberty made on the shape of the body of a free, courageous woman carrying in her hand the flame of freedom and independence from the control and tyranny of men. The newly married couple, Sam and Susan, settled in the most beautiful city in the world, New York. We can write a huge volume that is 10 times larger than the size of this book to show the enormous difference between the Islamic marital life lived by the Muslim wife Irshad al-Shamari in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and the beautiful Christian marital life lived by the Christian wife Susan Wilson in the United States of America. In short, the difference between her Muslim husband Mustafa and her Christian husband Sam is like the difference between night and day, darkness and light, Satan and God. About the author of this novel. Dr. A. Ahmed is an author and scholar. He has 5 university degrees, bachelor's, master's, and PhD in philosophy and comparative studies of religions from India, and BA and MA in religious studies and philosophy from Canada. He was born and raised as a Muslim, but through his study of philosophy and comparative studies of religions, he converted to Christianity. He has a unique writing style, so he can break through any religious, social, and cultural barriers and reveal the truth as it is. Moreover, his books are based on direct eyewitness because he witnessed with his own eyes the dire circumstances of Muslim women. He wrote 25 books, but so far, he has published 10 of them. He wrote all his books in English and translated them into Arabic. All his books deal with women's issues in Islamic societies and the causes of religious terrorism in Islam. His novels are available to listen to them for free on his YouTube page, as he narrates them on his own voice in English and Arabic.